throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howe. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howe looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime.
Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone.
Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. That's right, guys. You thought we were done, but we're not, because we have maybe the most chaotic time we have ever seen in Tar Heel football history, because you have staff rumors, you have recruits in the 2025 class officially signing letters of intent, or in the case of Austin Alexander, maybe not just yet, but in the coming days. You have guys withdrawing their name from the transfer portal. You have, I believe, maybe one other guy entering his name into the transfer portal since the last time we've been on. Maybe not, but still, we'll make sure that we hit on anybody that could have possibly entered before from the last time that we talked. And then, that's right, we have just transfer portal visits out the wazoo. I mean, at this point, I can't even keep up. I mean, hell, there might be guys from Wazoo that could be targets for Carolina as well. This is just absolute chaos, but it is one of the most interesting times in Tar Heel football history. And so we had to come on here and talk to you guys about all of this. And really, this is all happened since Bill Belichick became the head coach of the Tar Heels. We've seen him multiple times now on Pat McAfee's show talking about being the head coach at Carolina, and it is still one of, if not the most polarizing topics in all of college sports right now, really in all of sports. The country as a whole is still talking about Belichick being with the Tar Heels, and it is something that has been amazing to see. I don't know about you. It's starting to get a little bit more comfortable for me seeing the pictures of him with recruits and everything like that. And so let's start with the recruiting, and let's start with the guy that was out in the Smith Center with him on Saturday after announcing on Friday that he was going to stay committed to Carolina and that he was going to sign his letter of intent to Carolina. And that's four-star quarterback Bryce Baker. We talked about it. He was the biggest piece for Carolina in this 2025 class. One of the first things that Bill Belichick had to do when he took over this job was get in contact with Bryce Baker and tell him, you are incredibly important to us. This is why I feel like you should be a part of my first recruiting class that I'm going to bring in here at Carolina. And they end up getting it done. Bryce Baker is staying in place. And it feels like, buddy, this is a big, big keep for Carolina, because we were a little bit worried about this one. He took the official visit to Penn State. I feel like that probably didn't go great, considering that he was then almost immediately saying, I need to see who the coach is at North Carolina. But this was the guy of the future for the Tar Heels. This is a guy that had been locked in with them since June of 2023. So keeping him here, keeping an in-state prospect like that for the future was incredibly important, and Bill Belichick and his staff get it done.
Yeah, it's the first of many big-time recruits I think you're going to see stay in-state but play at North Carolina. Mack Brown did a very adequate job at the very beginning, repairing those in-state recruiting relationships and getting a lot of that talent to Chapel Hill. But that stuff waned the longer he was on the sidelines. And not because of him personally, but just really because the success wasn't there. And then there was so much unknown about how long he was going to stay that the kids were going elsewhere. I think with how Carolina is setting this thing up, with the player personnel staff they're going to put together on top of the coaching staff, kids will feel confident going to play for Bill Belichick no matter what, because they know they're going to get developed. And I think they know they're going to win at a higher level than what this program had done in recent years under Mack Brown. So, never really worried about Bryce Baker going anywhere else, especially once Bill Belichick got hired and got introduced. We knew that he would know the importance of landing him. They know that would really get the ball rolling as they really target that second signing day to really be a chance to fill out that 2025 recruiting class on top of what they're going to do in the transfer portal. So his commitment was the first of many where I expect the top most premier talent in this state to choose to not only play in the state of North Carolina, but play at UNC as Carolina looks to build that recruiting wall Mack Brown talked about so often during his second stint in Chapel Hill.
All right. And so then you turn your attention to the other guy that was committed to the class, but did not sign in the early signing period. That's four-star edge rusher Austin Alexander. He actually spoke with Don Callahan today and has officially made his decision that he too will stick with his commitment and will sign with Carolina. This one, not really a shock, but you kind of wondered here, especially with him being an out-of-state guy, comes out of the state of Kentucky, but he's another guy that was committed to Carolina for a while. It seemed like, for him, maybe even more so than Bryce Baker. I mean, this is a guy that did not take an official visit to another school even after the announcement that Mack Brown was no longer going to be the coach of Carolina. So it really makes you wonder, was this a guy that was really just locked in the entire way? And I think that's probably the case. I think he just needed to hear from Bill Belichick and, maybe just take a few days to think about it, make sure that it was the right destination. But a good job by Carolina going out of the state and keeping an edge rusher that I think has a lot of potential. And it's at a position where Carolina really needs to add as many bodies as possible, because you're losing Kamen Rucker, you're losing Des Evans. You're going to probably go in and add at least one guy in the transfer portal there. But you like to have as many shots or as many bites out of the apple, rather, in order to find those guys that can be productive at one of the most important positions on the field at that edge rusher spot.
And I think this is an area that we expect to see better production, better technique from that group. And this seemed like a kid that stayed locked into Carolina, but while things are not completely finalized with Belichick's staff, Brian just wanted to be told what the vision was going to be, what the layout was going to be, what the expectations were going to be. And while that's all coming together, still felt confident to go ahead and give that commitment to Belichick and Carolina. And I think that's going to be something you're going to see happen a lot more frequently once the staff comes together, both the coaching staff and that player personnel staff. I think you're going to see kids come in a lot quicker with a lot more certainty, because they're going to, once they know who their position coach is going to be, who their development coaches are going to be, their training staff and all that stuff is going to be, the vision for what Bill Belichick sold Carolina on will be easier for these players to see and believe in, and ultimately give them their commitment, whether it's coming out of high school, coming out of the transfer portal. So I think the last 48 hours or so are just the beginning of the talent wave we're going to see flood Chapel Hill over the next month or so.
Yeah, and when it comes to the guys outside of these two, now where does Carolina turn? That's the question that I think a lot of people are asking is where does the attention turn on the recruiting trail? Well, there still are guys in the 2025 class. So you've got JUCO running back Wayman Jordan Jr. He's a guy that, incredibly productive year at Hutchinson Community College. He's actually going to be on campus over the weekend on Saturday visiting Carolina. And then there is going to be, I think he's scheduled to visit Friday. I forget the update that somebody sent me the other day about Justin Hazelhool, who is a guy that is an interior offensive lineman. He was at one time committed to Georgia Tech after Clemson was favored heavily for him for a long time. He ended up decommitting. And now with the hire of Bill Belichick, this looks like a legitimate guy that Carolina could land. 4-star prospect, incredibly talented at a Raven Gap high school. So this was a guy that Carolina was high on when they had Mac Brown in place. And it didn't end up working out. He started to trend to some of the bigger schools. But now with Belichick here, it feels like his recruitment might be more opened up, and Carolina may actually have a chance to jump in here and get him. So 2 guys that'll be worth monitoring. When it comes to the recruiting stuff with Baker, Alexander, and the 2 guys that we just talked about, we'll be talking more about that later on this week. Thursday night, me and Zach Hubbard will give you all of the latest when it comes to the recruiting side of things and what's going on. I mean, a couple of 2026 quarterbacks, some of the best in the nation, taking notice of Bill Belichick as well. So we'll be detailing all of that for you in depth on Thursday night if you want more on the recruiting side of things. Now, let's shift to the current roster. How about the guys that are pulling out of the transfer portal? There are 3 guys that have pulled their name out of the portal. And I think all 3 of them are huge. The most significant is the most recent, and that is Amari Campbell, who pulled his name out over the weekend. This is a huge get back for Carolina. I mean, this guy was the top linebacker in the portal for a reason. He led Carolina in a lot of different areas, one of the top tacklers, tied for the lead in sacks, tied for the lead in tackles for loss, just an impact player all around. And oh, by the way, first 2 or 3 games of the year, he had a cast on his right hand, which he had hurt during the preseason. So this is a guy that if he stays fully healthy, it feels like he is going to be an extremely impactful player. And you got to think, he was an impactful enough player under Jeff Collins' defense. What's he going to be like with whoever Bill Belichick ends up hiring as a defensive coordinator? I think the sky's the limit for him. And that was a huge withdrawal for Carolina, and a great job done by Bill Belichick and Michael Lombardi to get him back on the team.
Yeah, it gives this front 7 a face that we'll know and recognize going into winter ball or winter training, and then going into spring ball. And the chance to play defense for Bill Belichick, play that linebacker spot for Bill Belichick, it's hard to pass up. You look at those great Patriot teams in the early 2000s. They were headlined by great linebacker play. You had Mike Vrabel. You had Teddy Bruschi. Those were the faces of those defenses that won those championships. And then even throughout his time in Dante Hightower and some other guys that would really play that position at a high level. Matthew Judon, a guy that could rush the passer but could also do stuff in other areas as well. And I think Amari Campbell is a unique talent that Bill Belichick values and probably told him very bluntly, I'm going to get you better technique, I'm going to get you in better shape, and I'm going to get the most out of your skill set. And you're probably already thinking that you've produced a lot. And he did under Jeff Collins, but there's another level that I'm going to be able to get you to. And, getting him back, I think, gives you something to believe in about this defense that we all believe is going to be better in all areas. Having him back is the first big step for this defense, taking that step forward we've been talking about for well over a decade as Carolina fans.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, because they can move him to, around in this defense. They can use him in a bunch of different ways. And I think he's going to be a leader on this defense this year. You know, this will be his second year as a starter, but I think this year was very valuable for him. And he was one of those guys that, say whatever you want, he was one of the more consistent players on this defense. And with Power Eccles leaving, with Kamen Rucker leaving, pretty much the majority of that defensive line leaving, there aren't many leaders that are returning. Elijah Huzzy will be gone. Stick Lane on the back end. So a lot of veteran guys leaving the defensive side of the ball. This is a guy that you should want back. I saw multiple people commenting, why would we want any guys back from this defense? Guys, if you watch this dude play, especially when he was healthy and when he was getting the help that he needed up front from the defensive line, where they were actually getting a little bit of penetration, he was one of the better linebackers in this conference. And deserves to be on this roster this season. I think he's going to have a lot of success with Belichick and whoever he ends up hiring running the defense. You then talk about, I think Austin Blaske is probably on the same level as Campbell, because you look at just how impactful he was. This is a guy that started every game that he played in for you. He was banged up. Ended up missing the game against NC Central, but the other 11 games he started for you at center and was incredibly effective. Really solid run blocker, not as good as some of the tackles. Both your tackles were your two best run blockers, but very solid in the middle. More importantly, tremendous pass protector. Willie Lampkin didn't let up a sack this year. Well, Austin Blaske right there with him. No sacks allowed this year, and just 5 quarterback pressures, which is actually a better number than Lampkin, who earned first-team All-Conference and was actually earlier today named a first-team All-American by the Associated Press. My thing is Austin Blaske is a guy that didn't even receive honorable mention. Somehow, in the All-ACC, that is. Somehow, Howard Sampson receives honorable mention, but not Austin Blaske. This is a guy that I think Carolina really needed back. He's going to anchor this offensive line in the middle. And I think this is somebody that the staff really valued. And you knew when he pulled his name out of the transfer portal, which was last Wednesday, that was really the first sign that Belichick and his was getting ready to officially come in and take over at Carolina.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to recognize with these guys withdrawing their names from the portal is you'll look at it on the surface and say, well, they want the opportunity to play for a Hall of Famer, and that's very well true. But also, Belichick has to want that specific player, because he's not going to have a hard time looking these guys in the eyes and telling them the truth. If they're not good enough to play for him, he'd tell them. And so the fact that these guys are withdrawing their name from the portal tells you that Belichick values their talent, values their potential, and understands the importance for them moving forward. And so you're talking about a guy that will be the anchor of Carolina's offensive line next year, will be probably the heart and soul of that interior offensive line next year. And, you go back to when you look at those great Patriot teams, do they have offensive linemen that you could recognize and point out? No, but they were so sound fundamentally, they did not beat themselves, and they were just consistent week after week. I think it's something we also should expect to see this program take that next step is on the offensive line, where I think they'll upgrade the talent level, but the coaching and the development will be so much better that the mistakes that we've seen that unit make, and the errors that have really cost them, like an illegal man downfield week after week, that stuff will be eroded because, if there's one thing you could say about Bill Belichick offensive lines is that they were maybe not always the most talented, but they were always the most fundamentally sound. And having a guy like him back, he'll be leading the way because he showed this past year he's fundamentally sound and technical sound. It was a big reason why Carolina's interior offensive line was as good as it was throughout the duration of the season.
The other guy that I really liked that Carolina brought back, the third and final guy, was Aiden Banfield. And this is another guy that got criticized. Many people were like, why do we want this kid back? Guys, you need to realize this is a dude that was a true freshman this year, started out of the gate, And as we heard Mac Brown say after that game, that week 1 game against Minnesota, this was a dude that was dealing with a lower body injury for the majority of the season. There were a couple of games that he missed in the middle of the year when it got re-aggravated. So I think that while people are critical of him, they look at him and say, well, he gave up a decent amount of pressures. That's an area that he certainly has to improve. But I thought for a true freshman, there were some really good signs there. And I, for one, am glad that they hold on to Aiden Banfield and get to see him continue to grow with this new staff.
Yeah, no, you go back to that Minnesota game and you could see the talent. You could see the potential of him being a difference maker on the offensive line for Carolina. And injuries did not allow us to see all of that. But the talent's there, the ability's there. I think he's a guy that can finish blocks as well as anybody on the offensive line. There was a mean streak in him. And then now he's about to get coached up. He's about to be developed. And I think this is a guy that when it's all said and done, we'll be talking about an all ACC caliber offensive lineman. So a real big get for Carolina getting him back on that offensive line.
All right. Now we move to the other part of the transfer portal, which is the absolutely insane part that Carolina is going through right now. First of all, Carolina lands their first transfer portal commit earlier today in Holy Cross interior offensive lineman Christo Kelly. Now, when you look at him, he's a guy that started the last 2 years at Holy Cross, was pretty solid, pretty decent run blocker, part of, 2 really good offensive line units the last couple of years at Holy Cross, 2 of the better ones in the FCS each of the last 2 years. A guy that, can pass protect, was an all Patriot League first teamer this past year. But when you look at him, he's a guy that plays interior. He played, each of the last 2 years, all the games that he started at center. So that would lead me to believe that that's probably the position he's going to play. There might be a chance that they could play him at guard. He did play a couple of snaps there early on in his career. But he looks like a guy that's probably brought in to fill that role that Zach Greenberg left behind. Greenberg looks like he's going to go elsewhere, probably going down a level so that he can hopefully start. And so you bring in a guy like Kelly, who I don't think he's necessarily a guy that starts for Carolina, but provides some versatility if needed, and more importantly, provides some depth along this offensive line, especially at a center position, where at one point Carolina had lost all 3 guys that had snapped for them on the field this season, and then even back in the spring when they lost true freshman Andrew Rosinski.
Yeah, I think it's a move that is it sexy? No, but it's a move that I think will pay dividends in more ways than one for Carolina next year. Belichick loves to have versatile offensive linemen because injuries are going to happen. And can you have guys that can play multiple positions? And this guy has the ability to do that. But then, you just need depth. How often did we hear Mac Brown talk about trying to create depth, trying to develop depth? And we never got there. We never got there. And when you got 6 years to do that, that's inexcusable. And that's a coaching issue just as much as it is a player issue. And, we've heard from Belichick, we've heard from Lombardi say right from the ground, right from the get-go, they were going to build those areas of the football team up because that's how you win at a high level, is dominating and controlling the line of scrimmages. This guy may have played at Holy Cross, but has the potential to be a difference maker right away for Carolina. So not the first sexy transfer portal ad, but one that'll pay dividends for Carolina in more ways than one in 2025.
Yeah, most impressive thing about him, you look at his career numbers, pretty solid, graded out pretty well according to Pro Football Focus, both as a run blocker and in pass protection back in 2023. This year, a little bit of a lower run block grade, but a better pass protection grade. And here's the thing about him. He, in a combined over 1,200 snaps in the last 2 years, all at the center position, he has yet to allow a sack and allowed just 12 quarterback pressures during that 2-year span. definitely a guy that I think is a good starting point for Carolina, and they will probably only go up from here. Well, then you get to the group of guys that Carolina has scheduled to visit. There are a ton of them. You've already had a couple of guys that have visited. Last Friday, Elon edge rusher Kamari Brown took a visit to campus. And actually, that is the only one that has visited so far. Then you've got the guys that are coming up this week. You've got Michigan State wide receiver Isaiah Johnson on Tuesday. Thursday, Alabama offensive tackle Miles McVay. Charlotte place kicker Steven Rusnak. Saturday, pretty loaded day. We told you about the JUCO transfer Wayman Jordan Jr., who will visit. He won't be the only running back on campus. Army running back Kanye Udo, as well as Texas linebacker Darian Gillette will be on campus. 3 guys unspecified as to when exactly they'll be on campus. Marshall running back A.J. Turner, that's expected to be sometime early this week. So that could have actually been today, not 100% sure. Didn't see anything confirming that. So I would think it might be maybe tomorrow or sometime on Wednesday. Rice offensive lineman Chad Lindbergh, as well as South Carolina tight end transfer Connor Cox. So Carolina's got a bunch of these guys coming in. And then that's right, they did add one later this evening in the form of Caleb Odom, the tight end transfer out of Alabama. That's a place where Carolina is looking pretty feverishly. You would expect that, considering the connection that Carolina has, or that Bill Belichick has, rather, to Nick Saban. I mean, Nick Saban was one of the big reasons that he ended up taking the job. So, guys that come recommended by Saban, don't be shocked if those are guys that show up on campus at some point for a visit with Carolina. The other big name that entered the transfer portal today, and nothing is official just yet, although people are already saying that Carolina is in a really good spot and probably just has to really bring them on campus to seal the deal. That is Auburn transfer edge rusher Amaris Williams, who entered his name officially earlier today. That's a name to keep an eye on over these next couple of days. If Carolina can get him in for a visit, there's a chance that they can land him. So you look at that collection of guys right there. To me, I think one thing really stands out. There are 2 positions that Carolina is clearly focused on. They've already landed a commitment along the offensive line. And now they've got Miles McVay and Chad Lindbergh, both guys that can play offensive tackle, probably being looked at as the guys that will be brought in to help fill the shoes of Howard Sampson. And also the running back position, very clear that they are being aggressive, trying to bring guys in at those 2 positions.
Yeah, and should not be surprised with what they're doing on the offensive line. There's a need there to get deeper, but more athletic, more versatile. And they're going to attack that in that way. Then the running back room, we're going to talk about Hampton making his decision here in just a moment. Not surprised by that. You like what Goss was able to do for you, but this is what the portal offers when you've got NIL money and you've got the ability to bring in other talent. Is that, yes, you're over recruiting guys that you've recruited already, but you could get better players on your roster if you have the NIL means. And from what's been reported, Carolina has that. And if you really just look back at the way Bill Belichick's offenses ran during his time in the NFL, they always used multiple backs. Mm-hmm. It was very rare that they had a lead back, and they had different backs that did different things. And there's no reason to think that he's not going to bring that same coaching style, that same philosophy to the college leagues. It has nothing to do that he doesn't believe in Goss, but maybe he finds a guy that is a better receiver out of the backfield, and that's a different element to this offense as opposed to just relying on one guy. So I think it's just going to be interesting to see how many guys they ultimately go after. It feels like every time we see a big name enter the portal, Carolina's already in the running for his services. And that's just a reminder, this stuff does not happen if Bill Belichick was not named the head coach, and if the NIL funds that Carolina are making accessible were not a part of the hire, which means if you're a Carolina fan that's on the fence with all this roster news and transfer portal news that's happened in the last 48 to 72 hours, man, this should excite you. This should encourage you because this roster is going to be so much more gifted, so much more talented, and a lot more deeper than it's been in the last couple of years. And that's what happens when you hire a mastermind like Bill Belichick to really overhaul the way we've been running our football operations for quite some time.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty clear that most of these guys probably would not be visiting Carolina. Maybe they would. Maybe they take visits. But when you see other names on some of these guys' list, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Kansas State, even those teams, are we sure that Carolina ends up winning those battles in the past? You know, Ole Miss especially, I don't know any chance that Carolina beats them out, especially in the portal. That's where Ole Miss has really shined. But you think with Bill Belichick here, Carolina's got a really good shot. I mean, you look at Kanye Udo, the transfer from Army, which has become a very polarizing one. Many people asking me, how is it even possible for him to transfer? I'm going to be honest with you. I have no idea. That one confuses and baffles me as well, but he's in the transfer portal. He's a guy that ran for over 1,000 yards. I think he's more than worth the risk. And, you know, coming from Army, he's going to be one tough SOB. So I think that's definitely a guy that Carolina should be interested in. But, I mean, you look at some of the other teams that he's taking visits to. 2 playoff teams, Arizona State, SMU, and another team that's very well regarded in the SEC in Missouri. If you said that Carolina was one of the teams that got a visit for him and Mac Brown was here, I'd tell you there's no way in hell they are landing that commitment. He will end up with one of the 2 teams that made the playoff, or he'll go to Missouri, another place where they've recruited incredibly well in the transfer portal. With Bill Belichick, I think if Bill Belichick wants him, if that's the guy that he picks out of the group of running backs that they're hosting and says, that's my guy, I think he's going to be on this roster. And I think that's what's different for Carolina is you almost get to pick and choose which guys you want. There are other big names that are in the portal, guys that, you know, Carolina's already, you know, expressed some interest in. They haven't necessarily set a visit with. The thing that's interesting to me right now is that there hasn't been a quarterback that Carolina has been tied to. Now you look at the group of quarterbacks that's out there, and I mean, you know some of the names as well that have entered. I'm interested to see over the next couple of weeks, really, I think within the next week, if Carolina is really interested, if Michael Lombardi looks at this quarterback position, and he told us when he was on, I think that one was with Pat McAfee, he said that quarterback is one of the positions that we want competition at. Well, I mean, you look at the guys in the portal right now. I mean, Connor Wigman's a guy that's already committed. Miller Moss committed. Same thing with Darian Mensah, who's at Duke, and Jackson Arnold at Auburn. But outside of that, a lot of really talented guys that are still on the board that Carolina could potentially go after. I mean, there's a couple that really stick out to me and interest me the most. I think, you know, guy that was in Carolina's conference this past year, he's already got some interest elsewhere. But I think Fernando Mendoza out of Cal, definitely a guy that Carolina could look at. I'd like to say the guy that entered today, John Mateer, who was absolutely outstanding for Washington State this past year. But he entered with a no contact, which would make me believe that he's going to follow his offensive coordinator to Oklahoma. If that no contact is dropped, then I think Carolina should probably be intrigued by that one. And then there's, you know, a couple other guys, Aaron Noland, who's a former 5-star commit to Ohio State. He enters, I believe he was a true freshman this year. So that's an early entry, maybe a little bit more of a risk. And, you know, another guy that I think he's in his first year as well this year, Dylan Lonergan. That's a guy that comes from Alabama. He might actually be in his second year because I believe that was a Nick Saban recruit at a time. That could be an interesting one. And then a guy that a lot of people know in this conference, He's been there, done that, started early in the season for SMU before Kevin Jennings came in and replaced him. I think Preston Stone may also be a guy that might be worth taking a flyer on, at least to come in there and compete, because you look at his numbers when SMU was in the American, really good. This year, I think just got off to a little bit of a slow start, and they really like Kevin Jennings. They were kind of splitting time with them from the beginning, which I thought was kind of weird, put Preston Stone in a little bit of an odd situation, but he's another guy. At one point in his recruitment, former 5-star, he ends up going down to a 4-star, but still incredibly talented, and I'd like to see them maybe reach out to him. Are there any quarterbacks that you're looking at and thinking that Carolina should potentially take a look at bringing in here to compete with Jacoby Criswell and Bryce Baker?
Not off the top of my head, but I think there's still going to be a domino or two that will fall as we get to and through the first round of the playoff. And I think once that happens, you'll really see Carolina get aggressive. Also, I think, as much as you'd like to have a dynamic playmaker at the quarterback position, I think Bill Belichick could be comfortable winning with a Jacoby Criswell, or maybe what he sold Bryce Baker on to solidify that commitment was, hey, you're going to be the guy right away. You could be the next Sam Howell, the next Drake May of this program. So, you look at some of the guys that entered the portal. There were some gifted dudes that maybe you'd like to see Carolina have been interested in, but they've been somewhat reserved as of right now. But I do think if there was someone that were to enter the portal of significance, you'd see them jump on them. But I think the fact that they haven't tells you that this staff feels pretty confident where they're at in that quarterback room, because Michael Lombardi was not bashful when he said they were going to look to add competition, and that competition may have just come in the form of 4-star quarterback Bryce Baker.
That's a great point, and maybe that's what he was actually referring to. But for me, I wouldn't mind seeing them bring in another guy. But, yeah, that could have been what he meant. And the other thing they have to remember is that they still have Max Johnson on the roster. Now, I don't know how much this staff has evaluated him, how much they really like him. But if they're going to keep him on the roster, I think it probably is difficult to see them bringing in another quarterback, especially because looks like Michael Merdinger is going to hang around as well. So that means you'd have 4 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. I don't know if they're wanting to sink 5 scholarships into that quarterback spot. So I think there are interesting names out there. I'd like to see them reach out to a couple of guys in the portal. But if they really feel like Bryce Baker is a guy that's capable of coming in there and immediately competing for that starting job, then I think Carolina fans should be pretty comfortable with that. All right, let's move on to the draft decisions, because we do have a few that are already in. There's only one guy that has announced his draft decision that really had a decision to make. The other 3 guys that have already declared, those are guys that were out of eligibility, but they're declaring that, hey, we are going to put our names into the NFL draft pool. We're hoping to get invites to the combine, and then, of course, we'll go through our pro days. That's a new thing that I think people get really frustrated with when they see, oh, this grad student is announcing that he's going to the draft. Why is he doing that? Well, there are some guys that simply will just say, hey, my football career's over. I'm not even giving it a shot. This is a way for these guys to announce and say, look, I'm looking for an agent. I'm also trying to just get my name out there for NFL scouts that could be interested. So that's why they're doing it. Omarion Hampton was the guy that had a legitimate decision on his hands. And on Sunday night, he made the announcement that we all foresaw coming, which is that he is going to enter his name into the NFL draft. I'm not going to lie, when there was a little bit of a delay with his decision, and when I saw Bill Belichick as the hire, I thought to myself, could there be a situation where he ends up returning? But this is the right decision for Omarion Hampton, especially at that position. If it was almost any other position, I would say maybe there's a reason to stay, to be coached by maybe the greatest football mind of all time. But when you are at the running back spot where they value guys that don't have a lot of tread on the tires, and he's a guy that is going to come in there already with a decent amount of tread on the tires with how much Carolina used him over the last 2 years. This feels like the right decision for him to enter his name into the draft, especially because he might be the second guy off the board at that running back position behind Heisman finalist Ashton Genty.
Yeah, he's going to look really good in the Dallas Cowboy uniform.
Don't even say that.
Next year. Yeah, look, this was a decision that had to be made. With the way that the NFL for so long has devalued the running back, these guys got to go as early as possible to get their money. We've seen the running game return to the NFL. That does not mean that they're gonna start valuing running backs no matter how many yards Saquon Barkley and other guys put up this year. So I hate I don't get to see Omarion Hampton play in a Carolina uniform anymore. But this is a decision that, as much as any decision, man, I can get behind, because from a financial standpoint, even with where Carolina is at now from an NIL perspective, he'd still be losing money. He's going to make more money next year. He's going to set his family up for a generational wealth. So, we just really enjoyed the last couple of years that we had of him. I can't wait to see what he's going to do at the NFL level, because whatever team drafts him, while they're either in the first or second round, they're getting a special talent at that running back position.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we all know Genty's going somewhere in the first round. He's just that dynamic. I mean, when you're being compared, your season this year is being compared to Barry Sanders as one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen, you're going to go pretty high. And that's why I think that's probably who goes to the Dallas Cowboys. But yeah, wherever he lands, man, I would love to see him in New England. I don't think it's going to happen because I think they love Ramondre Stevenson. But I think he's a guy that wherever he lands, he's going to find success. He's an NFL back because of the way that he runs. He's a guy that has proven he can catch the ball out of the backfield at a very high level as well. So I think he is going to be to me, he should be the second running back off the board. Could there be somebody that impresses leading up to the draft? Oh, certainly. They always read into the 40 times, the way guys do these drills, all that BS. But he's a guy that should be off the board in day 2 of the draft. And, hopefully he ends up landing in a great spot. Now, you said that you hate that you don't get to see him in a Tar Heel uniform again. That might not be the case, because notice that in the statement that he released, he did not put that he will not play in the bowl game. And I've been told by a couple of different people that the rumors are he is actually out there in practice. So I don't know if it's the smartest thing in terms of his NFL future, but when I saw that he was 60 yards away from the single season record held by Don McCauley, I thought to myself, I think there is definitely a chance that he plays in this bowl game. We heard Mac Brown in the offseason. We tried to take him out of drills in the summer. He would literally sneak into the drills. Oh, it was in spring, not in the summer when they're not supposed to be, coordinating practice. But back in the spring, they said, look, man, we're taking the load off of you. We want you pretty much to have minimal touches. Mac Brown would say there were times where he would tell other running backs, hey, get out of the drill. I'm going to hop in there real quick and try to sneak a couple of snaps in, and they would have to yank him out of there. This dude is uber competitive. And when he has a shot at a record like that, when he has a chance to help his team close out the season with a win, I think there's a chance he might actually play in this bowl game. And if he does, I know there are some Carolina fans who will say, man, is this the best thing for his future? If he plays in this game, you need to enjoy this dude, just like we did with Sam Howell. I know that game, that bowl game, the Duke's Mayo Bowl back in 21, didn't work out the way that we wanted to, but enjoy the fact that you have someone that loves the school so much that they want to get out there and run it back one more time, even if it might not be the smartest thing for their future.
Yeah, and, it'd be a nice storyline, a reason to get invested in the bowl game is watching him break a record that's, stood for quite some time. So, and I would imagine that the game plan would probably be to force feed him the ball, break the record as quickly as possible, and then get him out of the game to prevent him from getting injured. So I would still be shocked ultimately if he takes the field in 12 days for that bowl game, just because there's so much to lose and not a whole lot to gain. But if he were to suit up and play, it would just be another example of what makes him different, what makes him unique and so beloved as a Tar Heel in an era where, I mean, guys are sitting out New Year's Six bowl games to prepare for the draft. For him to want to suit up and play in the Fenway Bowl would speak volumes about his competitive character, and we'll just have to wait and see ultimately if that's the case.
As for the other guys that have already announced their draft intentions, Kamen Rucker did announce that he will be entering the 2025 NFL draft. I made a mistake when I talked to you guys about Kamen. It was on a live video. I forget which one it was. There's been so many additions to the podcast, so many articles written. It's just, I'm scrambled. But I said that he had another year of eligibility. I thought he did. Apparently he does not. He is out of eligibility. At this point, like when it comes to the guys that played at Carolina during the COVID season, it is impossible to keep up with who has eligibility and who doesn't. But apparently he is out, and that really sucks, man, because the injury that he suffered in the game against NC State will probably drop him to almost an undraftable prospect. Teams are not going to take a risk on a guy that had a broken bone in his leg. On a cheap shot play by a pathetic player that just laughed it off and thought it was funny. A guy that isn't coming anywhere near the NFL. So just incredibly unfortunate for him. And you hate it. You hate it because this is a guy that busted his ass for Carolina more than any player on the defensive side of the ball since he got here. Remember, he came in as a 3-star linebacker prospect and turned into one of the best edge rushers that Carolina has seen since the Butch Davis era. So hopefully, I'm praying that a team just takes a risk, because if this dude can get back from this injury, he has a chance to be a really special player, especially with NFL coaching. So I'm hoping someone takes a risk on him. The other two guys, Jahvaree Ritzie, he announced that he is declaring for the draft. And this one made sense because he said that he is opting out of the bowl game. To me, don't really care. To be honest with you, Carolina needs to look forward to the future. I think they need to get a look at some of these other young guys on the interior of the defensive line. And right now, it looks like Carolina won't have him. And I don't think they're going to have Travis Shaw. Now, there have been some people that have told me that they have apparently they put up practice videos, and it looks like Shaw as well as Caleb Hood were going through practice. That might be the case. Maybe these are guys, we've seen this very rarely over the last couple of years, but there are some guys that enter the portal and then actually play in the team's bowl game that they are leaving. Maybe that's the case here for Carolina. Not really sure. Those guys might want to put something on tape. Under Freddie Kitchens, maybe he's allowing them to stick around so that they can, entice some other schools. But if Carolina doesn't end up having Travis Shaw, that means that it'll be Kevin Hester Jr., Joshua Harris, and then you probably get a look at guys like Joel Starlings, Rodney Laura, which I think is probably the best case scenario for you. See if those are guys that fit what the new staff wants. It'll give Michael Lombardi and Bill Belichick a chance to evaluate those guys and could give you some answers about how much you really need to pursue that defensive tackle spot in the transfer portal. I think Ritzie opting out, not the biggest deal, even though he was very effective early in the year, really hasn't been that effective down the stretch of the season. And then Stick Lane, he announced that he is going to attempt to make the NFL here in the 2025 draft. He, too, just like Amarian Hampton, no mention as to whether or not he's going to play in the bowl game. So that's a look at that position. When it comes to those guys, I mean, with Ritzie, any concern about him not being out there? Or are you with me that you kind of want to look at some of the young guys in the room?
At this rate, if a defensive player doesn't want to come back, doesn't want to play, I'm not going to be brokenhearted about it. I'm ready to see new faces. I'm ready to see new blood. I mean, I'll be honest with you, that includes Kamen Rucker, a guy that I think maybe maximized his talent.
He can't play anyways. He's got a broken leg. So
yeah, but I mean, like even if he could have come back, I was ready to move on from him as well. Like at some point, you just got to get something new in here because we've seen these guys with different coordinators really never just pan out, and we never saw them take the strides we wanted them to take. So, and I don't know, quite frankly, how good if these guys are good enough to play for Bill Belichick anyway. So at this rate, it's just kind of good riddance. Jahvaree Ritzie, good luck going to the NFL. I'll probably not watch you play in the CFL. Same thing for Stick Lane. And then for Rucker with the injury, it probably complicates things. But, we've seen guys come back from worse before. So it'll be interesting to see just kind of how that all shapes up and shakes out. But, and at this rate, I'm not going to be heartbroken if the same defensive players I've watched the last couple of years, if they're not back on this roster in some capacity next year.
Yeah, I would kind of push back on Rucker. I think if he did have another year of eligibility, that'd be a guy that would easily fit what Belichick wants to do. To me, he always played a lot harder than you would expect for a guy of his size. I thought, you saw how impactful he was when he came back to full strength in the middle of this season. And I mean, you go back to last year, that was one of the biggest bright spots on this defense, if not the biggest. He was one of the better pass rushers in all of college football. It was just that as the year went along, when you're playing over 700 snaps and getting worn down, it was harder for him to finish. So that's the one guy I wish I could see out there. The other guys, I'm kind of with you. If they opted out, wouldn't be the biggest deal in the world. All right, now let's get finally to the staff rumors, because there are two of them that I think are worth discussing. And we'll go in chronological order here because I think that probably makes the most sense. So in the middle of last week, or actually, excuse me, it was over the weekend. It feels like it was the middle of last week with how many articles we've been writing. But on Saturday morning, the Football Scoops, who does a great job covering all of the different movement when it comes to the coaching carousel, all kinds of stuff like that. Two of their writers, John Bryce and Scott Rozelle, they reported on Saturday afternoon that Bill Belichick offered Kentucky assistant head coach Vince Morrow a position on his inaugural college staff. Now, why is this significant? I saw multiple people in the comments section asking, why would we want someone from Kentucky? Well, this is a guy that has been with Mark Stoops since the beginning at Kentucky and has helped them become a really good recruiting team in the SEC when the results haven't necessarily been as good as some of the other teams in that conference. This guy is viewed as one of the best recruiters in the entire country. He is their recruiting coordinator. He does so many different things for them when it comes to going on the recruiting trail, helping to land guys all over the country. He does a great job, especially in his home state of Kentucky. You would expect if he comes to Carolina, that would shift to the home state here in Carolina. And you could tell by the way that he's paid, one of the highest paid assistants in the sport at $1.3 million a year. When you hear something like this, I think a lot of people are skeptical because they just don't think Kentucky is that good of a football program. But when you see multiple outlets reporting that this is one of the best recruiters in the country, I don't see how you can't be interested in the Tar Heels potentially adding this guy to Bill Belichick's first staff.
Yeah, no, he's helped be the reason why Kentucky is a lot more competitive in the SEC, to the point where they're ready to run Mark Stoops out of town because they don't think they're winning enough for the talent that's on that roster. And so that guy deserves a lot of credit. And this is, again, another example of why you should be excited about Bill Belichick being the head football coach of Carolina, and the staff commitments financially that are coming with it. Because this would not be on the table with Mac Brown. This guy would not be willing to leave a coach he's been beside for over a decade, let alone potentially leaving his home state to go to Chapel Hill. But you do that to go head up the recruiting stuff for a Hall of Fame head coach that does have to adjust to recruiting at the college level. This guy would make that adjustment all the more easier. And there's probably a pay raise that is significant enough to leave that would be involved. And so, if you follow recruiting, you'll notice that Kentucky recruits very well considering where they are in the SEC pecking order in terms of attractability as a job. This guy deserves the majority of the credit for it. And you put him in Carolina's program, it would send shockwaves throughout the state because a lot of that top in-state talent would be choosing to play at Carolina over State, over Duke, over Wake Forest, let alone the national programs that recruit our state like Georgia, like Clemson, Ohio State, and others.
All right. Well, I lied. We're not going to exactly go in chronological order, but we're going to stick with guys that can really help recruiting-wise. And that's because today Carolina hires Andrew Blaylock, the assistant athletic director at UCF, for player personnel. They are bringing him in to become what exactly, you wrote the article, what exactly is the specific position that they're bringing him in for?
He's going to be the head of the player personnel department. So, that's something that Michael Lombardi talked about. They were going to put together that whole staff or whatever. That's the first move of that. And this is a guy that spent, 3 years at Central Florida. Before that, 6 years at App State, is a native of Durham, North Carolina. So basically a homecoming of sorts, but has done the player personnel type of role, what we've seen become popular in the college game at Central Florida. And this is going to be a guy that's going to be in charge of that department, and will be a big part of why you're going to see our guys, I think, be developed better than what we've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah, and also a big part of the recruiting side of things as well. And a guy that is, was at App State. He's familiar with this state. And also, as you mentioned, grew up in Durham. So I think that's a really good hire. And it just shows you the change in the hierarchy at Carolina. These are positions that weren't even really imagined. Carolina did have a GM this past year. That was Patrick Sudis. But, outside of him, there really wasn't a full front office staff like there needed to be. This is part of the change, and bringing in Blaylock, a guy that has a ton of experience with player personnel, I think is a great move for Carolina. Then you get, and this will be the final thing that we'll talk about tonight before we get out of here. Then you get to maybe the most interesting piece of staff news. And that's that Carolina is closing in on their top target at offensive coordinator. And it's a guy that a lot of people around these parts probably know. They at least know the name. And it's a guy that has experience at the NFL and college level. That would be Scott Turner, the son of, offensive genius, Norv Turner. This one, incredibly intriguing. Is this a name that I think would be at the top of a lot of people's list? Probably not. But is this a guy that, sort of blends with what Bill Belichick wants, which is somebody that can bring the pro side of the game to college, but also has some college experience to his name? That's the reason why I think this is seen as one of the top options for Carolina. Now, the thing that scares me about him, man, you go back, you look right now, he's the interim offensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders. Currently, the Raiders are playing a game. It's a 15-9 game at home late in the fourth quarter. Offensively, they've had issues the entire season, losing Gardner Minshew, who he put back in as the starting quarterback when he ended up taking over for their fired offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy. That certainly didn't help, but the offense isn't really moving all that consistently under him. And you go back to his 3 years as the offensive coordinator from 2020 to 2022 in Washington, with the football team and then eventually became the Commanders. Not a ton of success. So I got to be honest. This is the first time I've really heard a name that's popped up, because there have been a couple other names that have been rumored for offensive coordinator. Of course, people throwing out names for defensive coordinator. This is the first time I've been concerned about hearing a name that Bill Belichick is interested in. And I'll be interested to see how this one ends up working itself out, if this really is Carolina's top target.
Yeah, I mean, the common theme in those stops where he's been at previously, what type of quarterback play was he dealing with? Hard to be successful when you don't have a difference maker at that position. That's not going to be the case at Carolina, whether it's Bryce Baker, Jacoby Criswell, or whoever. Carolina is going to have much better quarterback play, yes, at the college level, than what he's dealt with at the NFL level. I, particularly as a fan, and was wanting to see the way the staff came together, was wanting a college first guy to come run the offense, and a college first guy to come run the defense. We know that so much of the schemes and concepts, yes, they have translated to the NFL. It's still a different game. You still game plan different. You still scheme differently. And so I'd much rather take a guy that's used to that, that's in tune with the college game, as opposed to asking a guy to take what he does at the pro level and mold it at the college level. But I mean, dude, he's the son of an offensive wizard. I mean,
Yep.
Norv Turner at every stop was an innovative offensive mind, whether he was with Dallas Cowboys, then the Washington Redskins. We know what he did with the San Diego Chargers offense all those years. We saw him rebirth Cam Newton's career before the injury. And so I think, there's coaching pedigree in Scott Turner. I think this is a guy that could learn and adjust to what you do at the college level, while bringing some NFL concepts, which will make it tough for all defenses to defend you. So I'm with you. It's not a name that I would be thrilled about. It doesn't jump off the screen at me, but I could see a situation where it works and where his offense functions at a better level at the college game than what it's done at the NFL game, simply because he'll be supported by better talent at the college level and a better coaching staff.
Yeah, and that certainly could be the case. I just feel like it is a little bit risky, where I think that the other name that I've seen rumored, I've been told by a couple of different people, is offensive coordinator for Ole Miss, Charlie Weis Jr., which would make a ton of sense. Charlie Weis, of course, former assistant under Bill Belichick, eventually became the head coach, as you guys know, at Notre Dame. His son, I mean, look, Ole Miss's offense was really good this year. I know there are some people that apparently at Ole Miss were complaining about his offense, but I mean, you had one of the most productive wide receivers in the country before he got injured. Jackson Dart had a tremendous season, again this year. Looks like he's a guy that I think there are still some things that they probably have to correct with him, but could be an NFL quarterback at some point. So I think that's an interesting name. And I don't know what his interest level would be, especially if the rumors are actually true that he ended up being runner-up in this race for the head coaching job. I would see if Tommy Rees has any sort of interest. As a head coach, I thought that might have been a little risky. As a play caller, he did it at Alabama. Now he's in the NFL coaching quarterbacks with the Cleveland Browns. I think that could be a guy that would be kind of a perfect mesh between the pro game and the college game. So I'm interested to see what Carolina does there. And you can imagine the news is only going to keep rolling in, guys. As Josh said on the Four Corners podcast at the end, the site is hopping because we put up an article at this point. I mean, when I'm on the air, sometimes it's a little difficult to keep up with the news. Josh is helping me out with that. We put up an article about every hour to 2 hours. at this point during the day, because that's how much news is rolling in. There's an article getting ready to go up tonight about Chad Lindbergh, a little more in depth on him, when he visits during sometime this week. There'll be one up tomorrow morning about Caleb Odom for you guys to check out. So there is plenty of content for you guys to look at on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. All the storylines that we talked about tonight, there is an article for every single one of those storylines if you want a more in-depth look at each of those stories. So make sure you check that out. And of course, hey, basketball's still going on right now. I know a lot of the storylines are focused on Belichick right now, but the basketball program picked up a nice win the other day over LaSalle at home. Now they enter a crucial week again with 2 ranked games, one tomorrow night against Florida in Charlotte at the Spectrum Center in the Jumpman Invitational, and then one later in the week at Madison Square Garden in the CBS Sports Classic against number 22 UCLA. We will have you covered on all fronts with that, Josh, with the preview and recap on the website of both of those games. And then on the Four Corners podcast side of things, me and him taking you through the previews and recaps for those games. So make sure you check out all of that content for the podcast. Make sure you go wherever you listen to your podcast, and make sure you subscribe to that one as well as the Heel Tough Blog podcast, especially if you are a listener to the podcast. So that wraps it up for this edition of the show tonight. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go